In this video, I'm going to show you how to replace the exhaust manifolds on this Ford F-150 with a 5.4 liter engine. Having said that, if you need this or any other part, check us out at oneauto.com. Let's get started.
I want to take this out of the way, which is held on with two clamps, one over here and one over here. Use an 8mm socket, remove the clamp here. Well, don't remove it, but loosen it up so we can remove this. That much should be good. Move over here, loosen this one. You can also use a flathead screwdriver, as you can see, on both of them. And now I'm going to pull the intake tubing off of this part of the intake. Pull it up and out of the way and give it a couple twists. That should break it free off of here. Pull this out of the way. Now we have to get this whole intake part out of the way. There's a 10mm bolt here. There's one on the back side underneath this air intake resonator. So we have to remove this, and there's two more 10mm on the other side, but we have to start here. So use your socket to take this one out. And then with a pair of pliers, we're gonna have to squeeze this clamp so we can pull this off. Okay, this is a locking clamp, so once you open it up enough, it'll automatically lock in place and stay open. This will allow you to wiggle this right off of here, which will expose this rear 10mm bolt. So let's take that out while we're at it. And then there's two more on the other side. Next, let's remove this clip over here that holds the wire for the throttle body. Get a trim tool underneath and just pry it out. Okay, and then if you look up, I'll have this plastic hose here, this line. There's a green tab on it. If you press it outwards like this and then in towards the intake, it'll actually lock in the open position and you'll be able to release this. Now be careful, this doesn't bend. It pivots a little bit, but it is plastic, so don't move it too far or it'll snap. Two more 10mm bolts on this side. Now you can lift this up and wiggle it off of the throttle body.
For this job, we're going to have to disconnect the battery. So take a 8mm wrench or socket and loosen up this mounting nut. Once it's loose enough, you should be able to wiggle the negative terminal off. Set it aside so it doesn't touch the battery terminal. Use a 21mm socket. Unfortunately though, I'll have to use a 22 because my lug nuts have swollen up inside of these chrome caps, and that makes them so that they're not really a 21mm anymore. Regardless, let's take off all 6 and pull the wheel off. With these off, take the wheel off. Now with the wheel off, we have to remove the fender liner to gain better access above the strut tower to get to the manifold. The first thing I like to do is to disconnect anything that's connected to the fender liner, and for the most part that's just going to be these two clips right here. This is going to be your ABS sensor, so pull it out. This is also the ABS sensor, it's just clipped up along here. If you can't get it, just grab a trim tool and pop it off. I'm going to work my way front to back. There's going to be a 10mm bolt right here. Let's remove it. There's actually another one right up in here. You can't see it. There we go. On the other end of that bracket, you have a push clip right there. A little bit tricky to get to, but try to pop it out. I'm just going to take this bracket completely off so I can gain better access to it since it's not coming off. On the fender side, you'll see multiple 5.5mm screws. Let's take all these out. There should be a third one, but mine's missing. 7mm all the way at the back. Up at the top in the middle of it, there's a sneaky little push clip here. Let's get this one out. Now just maneuver this fender liner until you can get it out of here. And set it aside. And let's do the same on the other side. At this point, I'm going to disconnect the exhaust pipe to manifold bolts. They're 15 millimeter in size. Do this to both passenger and driver side. This is the driver side. We'll move to the passenger side in a little bit. 15 for me didn't work, so I'm going to hammer on to 14. Also, I should mention I've been spraying these with rust penetrant for a little bit, so it should have done its job by now and gotten into the threads, which it looks like this one we were able to get off, so let's move on to the next one. Make sure it's fully seated. There we go. Grab the pipe, pull it down. As you can see, it broke free. Now let's do the same to the other side. Okay, on this one, the whole stud pulled out of the manifold. That's totally fine. I'll show you how to fix that later. For the other one, you'll need a swivel. Okay, I was able to get that one off with a 15. Now this pipe should be loose, which it is. Next, I want to work on removing the engine and transmission mounts. I'm going to start on the transmission mount. I just want to unbolt it off of the frame rail right here. That way, as we raise the engine up, this is free to also raise up. Otherwise, it tilts it at an angle and things will hit up in the engine bay. So 18 millimeter socket, take off both of these mounting nuts for the transmission mount. Now for the passenger side engine mount, you'll notice that if you look right between the frame and the front differential, or between the frame and the sway bar, right where I have the camera pointed, these are 21 millimeter mounting nuts. And for the driver's side, you'll notice that it's a very large through bolt on this side, unlike the other mount, which just has the two nuts and studs that go through the frame. This is a 24 millimeter bolt. There we go. Take this out. Now we need to raise the engine. In order to not damage the oil pan, I chose to jack it up on the transmission right here. And you can see I have a rubber pad in between my pull jack and the transmission. You do not want to put a metal surface directly on here because it has a high chance of it damaging this area, the bell housing, and cracking it. You don't want to do that. So I put a rubber pad in, and this will cushion the force that this is applied here. To counterbalance that, because the engine is heavy and the transmission's also going up, I have another pull jack at the front here. A little difficult to see, but basically it's sitting at the front of the oil pan, right where it curves up. And I have two pieces of wood in here stacked together so that it can have a flat, even surface to press on. And again, I don't want to jam this metal pull jack right into the oil pan. It will bend and then you'll damage it. So the wood will not only apply an even force, but the wood is way softer. So if anything, this will start squishing before any damage occurs to the oil pan. Having said that, these two together will allow me to raise the engine up evenly. So let's do that. I'm gonna go back and forth between the two. That way everything comes up at the same time. Okay, now let's go on the driver's side. I'm actually going to unbolt the engine mount plate off of the engine. This will give me a little bit more room to work with the lower manifold bolts. There's this one here on the back of the engine and then two on the front side. I'll show you how to get those. These are 13 millimeter in size. And if you look in the front, right between the differential and the power steering rack, you'll see the other two right there. To get to them, I'm just gonna go through where you would take the oil filter out, slide a ratchet in there. This other one, I'm gonna try and get through the fender well. Now we have plenty of room to remove the studs and nuts that go underneath. And as you can see, the last one all the way in the back for us is already broken. It's the same at the top. These are actually very common to break, these last ones. So if you have it, remove it, start there. If not, well, I'm gonna start on the next one. These are technically 13mm fasteners. Hopefully they still are. A lot of times you have to hammer on a smaller size socket. And if they still look like a nut, but they are rusted, pretty much what we have going on here, a 1/2 inch socket will fit even better because it's a tiny, tiny bit smaller. So I'm gonna start with a 13 and we'll see what happens. Make sure your socket is well seated, the best it can be. All right, that's number one successfully removed. We'll see how many don't break. That's number two. Well, it's not easy to see, but this is the best view I can get you of that first stud on the lower half of the manifold. Wow, I got it. Okay. And now moving on to the upper ones. If you have to hammer a socket on, you're better off doing that than routing the fastener off by accident. So just make sure your socket is very well seated on here. Yeah, see this one's not. I'm gonna switch to a 1/2 inch and I'm gonna hammer it on. I also got rid of the swivel to take away some of the variable movement here. There we go. There's the other one. And now we have one nut left, which is the one at the top all the way in the front. I put this one back on so I can hold the manifold on as I loosen the other one up. And now we can just loosen that one up. Oh, all right. Oh, that pulled out the whole stud. Actually, that's perfect. I'm gonna pull this nut off. Perfect. I'm gonna pull these gaskets off now so I can get these out of the way. I want as few objects here in my way as possible. Now, it's all a matter of maneuvering it back and forth until you find the right angle to slide it out. Go. Driver side manifold out. So here we are with the manifold and the gaskets out, and we need to get these two broken studs out. As you can see, these rear two over here are broken. So there are two options to get these out. You make a special tool that will basically guide your drill bit in at the right angle so you can drill them out. For that, you not only need the tool, you also need a 90-degree drill, good drill bits that'll drill through however many studs you have. The other option is the way I want to attempt it, and that is to clean up that stud, weld a nut to it, and then pull it out with a nut. I have had great success doing this in the past. I know both options are not so easy, and you need special tools for both of them. So keep that in mind. I'm gonna try this, and if this doesn't work, then we can drill it. Try and clean up that stud with some sandpaper. Push the sandpaper in with a screwdriver. Whatever you have that'll clean that up, just so we can build up some weld on there. Before I do anything else, I'm just going to take a punch and a hammer and just give this a couple taps. The reason for this is the vibrations sometimes help break it free, get any debris out. And now what I want to do is pull up a little bit of weld in there, which will hopefully allow me to have something to weld the nut onto. Give it another few taps. Now let's get a socket that fits on there and see if it comes out. I welded a second nut on here. A lot of times, the first one breaks. Let's see if this does the same thing or pulls out the stud. Oh, there we go. Stud's coming out. Inspect the threads. They look good still, so we can reinstall a new stud without tapping. That's perfect. All right, let's move on to the lower one. I'm gonna try and clean it up with the die grinder, but you know, if it fails, I'll just get the sandpaper like last time. That's looking pretty good, I'd say. Wire brush the area. If you can get the wire brush to get in the hole there, that would be great. Blow it off to remove debris. And let's puddle up some weld. I'm going to be a lot more careful with this since it's right next to the head gasket. All right, and a couple taps again. For this one, I'm gonna go no extension. Just gonna stick the socket right here and see what it does. I normally don't like to use power tools when I extract these like this, but this one's coming out so smoothly that I can actually use my air ratchet to make things a little more efficient. And there you go. And now to extract the other studs. Well, they used to have a hex cutout on them, but clearly they are far beyond that, so I'm just going to use an extractor socket, which has these teeth on the inside. It grips on, and if this doesn't work, I'll just go to a smaller size. And this is what I'm going to do to get them out. Hammer this on here nice and tight. A little tight in here, space-wise. This socket has the option of putting a socket on it, so I'm going to use it because the inside is taken up by the stud. There we go. Just go slow with this if needed, soak it in rust penetrant and work it back and forth. But at this point it's coming out pretty smoothly actually. And the reason I'm taking all these out is for two reasons actually. One, I don't want to reuse these. I never like to reuse these. They do rot, they do break, they get weak. Always replace them is my recommendation, and I have new ones. The second reason is I need to clean this surface here, and the best way to clean it is without these studs in the way. If you have to leave them in, if yours are good and for some reason you want to reuse them, even though I recommend replacing them, just clean around it. But I'm not going to clean until we get all these out, because then I can take a sanding block and clean evenly. Having said that, you already saw the process for this. I'm just going to quickly do the other ones, and then we can move on to cleaning. The reason I skipped this one is because when I tried it, it wanted to twist the stud, as in break it. And so I stopped. I did the other ones, and if needed, I could have welded a nut to it to apply some heat. However, what I did is I just took the hammer, tapped it sideways a couple times, and then a little bit harder going in. That will break the threads free inside. So now, with this being the last one, we can start cleaning the head, preparing it to accept the new gaskets with the new manifold. I sprayed some brake parts cleaner on this surface just to degrease it. I'm going to take a wire brush and clean up the rougher areas here, especially this carbon buildup, and then I'll take the sandpaper to flatten everything out. On a sanding block, that is. You don't want to just use sandpaper by hand. If you don't have a sanding block, just use the wire brush and clean it up. The gasket will do the rest of the job. But since I have a sanding block, I am going to use it and make sure that everything is nice and smooth. And the reason I'm using the wire brush first is just so I don't clog up the sandpaper as fast. Okay, I'd say that's good for these two. Do the same to the other ones. When you use this sandpaper, make sure it's something fine. I'm using 400 grit. Make sure you don't damage the surface. You want to make it smooth. That's the point of this. Now with this sanded down, I'm going to spray it with brake parts cleaner to get all the debris off, all the sanding dust, any oils that are here. And one thing I want to mention is that you definitely want to blow out not just the exhaust port holes, but the bolt holes as well. Any liquid that is in there, including brake parts cleaner, yes, it does evaporate, but if it stays in there and you put the studs in, you will hydrolock that hole, meaning that fluid cannot compress, and you're trying to compress it, and what's going to happen is the head's going to crack because the aluminum is weaker than the pressure being put on the end of that threaded hole. So make sure you blow these out with some compressed air or let them dry for a while. Now get your new hardware, which again, I highly recommend. Install it. It's going to have one end that has an inverted Torx cutout on it. The other end is just threads, and it ends. The end with the inverted Torx cutout sticks out because that's what you're going to use to drive these in all the way. Of course, you could use the double nut method, but they are meant to have the inverted Torx socket put on them. You don't have to put all of them in. You can if you want. I will, but you can also put them in once the manifold is up here. But I find it more difficult to do that because you're also trying to hold the manifold in place, and it's not going to stay most likely. So I recommend just putting them all in, bottoming them out. It's totally doable. You have plenty of room to work with here to put the manifold in with these all the way threaded in. And when you tighten these, you don't want to tighten them a lot. You just want to snug them. You basically just want to bottom them out and give it probably 1/8 of a turn at most, because what's happening is when you put the nut on, it's putting pressure on the stud, pulling it outwards, and that's what's going to put pressure on both ends of the thread. So it's going to tighten up the head side and the manifold side. And if you tighten these too much, you can damage the threads inside the head. This is an E7 socket. That's the size of the inverted Torx socket you need to tighten these up. Again, just make them snug after they bottom out and stop right there. That's bottomed out, snug. That's it. If you have new gaskets, go ahead and use those. I'm actually going to reuse the old ones because these multi-layer steel gaskets are really good and reusable as long as they're not rotted, which these are not. I cleaned them up. This is just a stain from the manifold. The other side's good as well. Because I'm reusing them, I'm going to pay attention to where I put them. This one right here, you can see it has an indent from that freeze plug over there, so I know that this one went on the front 2 cylinders with the rust imprint on the manifold side, and the other side that's cleaner on the head side. Put those on, same with this one, just like this. It's also easy to accidentally put them upside down. However, the way you determine which way they go is by this flat cutout here. The cylinder has it on the bottom, this one has it on the bottom, the rest is round, so kind of like a tunnel. I'm going to remove the heat shield. I didn't realize it would be this tight in here since the old one didn't have it, but I guess better late than never. It's got to come off, otherwise it won't fit. You can just use a 10mm socket. These should be fairly easy to remove. I'm just going to pull this heat shield off of here, get it out of my way. Hopefully now the manifold can slide in a little bit easier. Oh yeah, there we go. There it is. I'm gonna hold it like this, start one of the mounting nuts on, just so it doesn't fall off. There we go. I'm actually gonna start all of them in now. And the ones underneath. Now it's time to tighten up this manifold. The sequence for properly tightening this is start at the rear top, then move to the rear bottom, and then go top, bottom, top, bottom, top, bottom till you are done. The torque is 18 foot-pounds. I'm just gonna say it right now, I will not torque this because I cannot fit my torque wrench to accurately torque it in here. I could do it with extensions and maybe swivels over there, but there's no way that's gonna be accurate. So I will estimate 18 foot-pounds by hand, and it's not that hard to do because 18 foot-pounds is basically just make it snug and then give it a little extra. So once it bottoms out, about 1/4 to 1/3 of a turn is what it takes. Basically, just make sure it's tight, but don't over tighten it. Having said that, I'm gonna first bottom it out to make sure that it's sitting nice and flush, and then we'll move to fully tightening it. These are all snug. Now I'm gonna do my best to tighten them. And of course I'm gonna go in the same sequence. So starting at the top here, just gonna make them nice and snug. Okay. You just want that gasket to compress properly. Okay. Well, I'd say they're all tight now. Try to get this heat shield back on here now. And get the 3 little bolts back on. And just snug them up a little bit. You don't have to make them crazy tight. They're very small and they can break if you over tighten them. All right, manifold is installed on this side. Now with the exhaust manifold in place, we can put the 2 studs in that will bolt it on to the rest of the pipe. You can use a 7mm socket to thread these in, and you just bottom them out, make them snug, just like that. You don't need to go crazy tight because as you put the nuts on, it'll tighten up both ends. And we'll do the other one as well. Now let's move over to the passenger side. Since the driver's side is bolted on and ready to go, I'm not going to secure the engine mount yet so that the engine can still be lifted up easily. On the passenger side, for me, I only have the rear 4 studs holding this on. The other ones are snapped off. So I'm only going to remove the ones that I have. But of course, for you, remove everything that you have here. So I'm going to start by removing the 2 lower ones and then the 2 upper ones. Judging by the condition of these, looks like someone has recently replaced them, so I'm not expecting them to be very stuck. Up at the top, let's get these 2 off. And like I said, these are the last 2 for me because they were the only ones holding this manifold on. All right, that whole stud came out. That's perfect. I was going to remove it anyway. And as you can see, the manifold dropped down. Let's grab the manifold and just try to twist it until you can find the right angle for it to slide out. Just like so. And there it is. There's the passenger side manifold. Let's get the gaskets off of here. Looks like someone used some sort of sealant here instead of putting in new studs. Obviously, we'll fix that. Get this one out of here. And we have 3 good studs that we need to remove out of the head, and then 4 broken studs. Let's start with removing the ones that still have some stud left, and then we'll worry about the other ones. All right, let's try and extract these studs here. I'm going to start with this top one, put the E7 socket on it, and just give it a couple taps with a hammer. And now we'll see if we can break this free. Nope. That's breaking the head right off. All right, so the next plan is going to be probably to use one of those extractor sockets just like we use on the other side. We're going to give it a couple taps. Hopefully it'll break free from the threads. I'll tap it up, down, sideways, and we'll see if that bites into the stud enough to remove it, because clearly the end of it is way too weak and it was just spinning. One more spin and probably the cutout here would have just ripped right off. Well, that didn't do it. Okay, I'm just gonna give the area around the stud just a little bit of heat. This is aluminum. I do not want to melt it or anything. I just want to make it warm. Aluminum does absorb heat very well and transfers it actually very well. So when I do this, I'm going to make sure that I am not pointing the tip of my blue flame very close to it. Well, obviously I'm pointing it at it, but I don't want to be touching it as if I was heating up steel. I want to be a little further away. I want to heat up the area around it so that the threads can hopefully break free. You can't really tell on camera, but there's a lot of corrosion around the base of the stud. So hopefully the heat will expand that aluminum just a little bit and allow it to break free. Let's tap our socket back on and see what we can do. Nope, socket's not gripping on enough. Well, I'm just going to weld a nut onto it, and this will do 2 things. One, it'll heat up everything, including the stud, which I know I said I wouldn't want to heat, but sometimes you have to. And then it'll also give me an area to grab onto so I can actually extract this stud, because clearly that extractor socket is not biting on enough. A couple taps. Okay, at least now we can work some magic with a broken stud on which we can weld a nut a lot better. So let's try again. I just broke it free. There it is. Threads are still good. We can reuse the hole. We'll try the extractor first. If it doesn't work, we'll just weld something to it. I know this one, I tried to use the inverted Torx socket on earlier and it did not work. It didn't do anything. It was actually just twisting the head, so I'm going to move right on to the extractor socket. Nope. Well, I couldn't get my extractor socket off, so I cut the stud, got the socket off of there. Now we're just going to weld a nut like I kind of wanted to from the beginning. Well, I won't bore you with too many details, so I'm just going to go ahead and remove all these studs. I'm just going to weld nuts onto them and hope for the best. I hope they come out. Well, things aren't quite working like I wanted for this last stud, and I cannot remove it by welding a nut onto it, so we're going to have to drill it. Whether that is drilling it partially and then using an extractor and extracting the stud by tapping the extractor in, and hopefully that pulls it out, or whether that means drilling it out completely and tapping new threads. Something has to happen. So to use the drilling tool, you have to put in 3 or at least 2 of the studs in the area, because this is what the tool looks like. It's just a plate that'll guide you. So I'm gonna have to slide it on over this stud. I'm gonna clamp it on here and here as well. Obviously we'll put the nuts on. And this lower one right here is the one that we're drilling. I'll show you a better view when the time comes. For now, I'm just gonna take some of my studs. I'm using these new ones, and I'll drive them in all the way. For this, you use your E7 socket, which technically you should be able to use to remove studs as well, but like you saw, it doesn't always happen. These should go in nice and smooth. If they don't, that means the threads are damaged in there, so you're gonna wanna tap that hole, get new threads cut so that it can grab on nicely. And when you tighten them, just bottom them out and give them another 1/8 of a turn after they get bottomed out. You just want them snug. You don't want to tighten them, because if you over tighten them, they will actually be more stuck in there than you would want. And when you put the nut on and clamp it, it actually puts pressure on both ends of the stud, so it'll tighten the stud side and the nut side. All right, so this one's snug. This one and this one are snug too. Now let's put our adapter plate on, secure it with the mounting nuts. Of course, we're gonna have to snug this up, make it nice and flush with the engine. Okay, now you want to take this adapter and this has 3-valve adapter. This is a 3-valve 5.4 liter, so we want to use this one, and you'll see that it has a little insert here. This is what's going to guide your drill bit as you drill. So you want to attach it to these 2 nuts here that are pressed into this plate, and then you have 2-valve over here and 3-valve over here. That's because the exhaust stud for the 3-valve is right here. So this should fit on perfectly like this. A little tricky to secure it in here because there's limited space to hold it. But once you get this one started, just thread it on all the way. And these little bolts you just tighten by hand. All you want is to hold this plate on. You don't have to crank it down with pliers or anything. All right. So at this point, we just need a 90-degree drill so it can fit in here. And then we can start drilling the stud out. Again, that will guide the drill bit for you. It's important to spray some lubricant in the hole where you're drilling. You want to lubricate the drill bit so it can last longer, and that way it prevents it from overheating too. And even though we are being guided by this insert, try to keep the drill bit as straight as possible, of course. Now once you've used the small drill bit through the guide and you drilled out approximately that much, about an inch depth, as you can see, I did the same on here. Make sure it goes in about an inch. I'll get that in a second. Then you want to take a bigger drill bit, and this time you're actually going to have to do it without the guide, which is the scarier part. You want to make sure you're going in straight. I actually started it off camera, but you can tell that it's going in straight, flush, parallel with the hole, and you want to drill it so that you can put an extractor bit in there and extract your broken stud. That just went through the stud. That's perfect. Now take your extractor. See how far we can tap it in here. As you might have already noticed, this process unfortunately did not work for us, and the extractor that we were using, we actually tried several, just was not biting enough. I think what's happening here is the threads of the existing bolt in there are so corroded they are forever attached with the head. So what we ended up doing to fix this is we just drilled it out one size bigger than what you just saw me drill out, and then we just tapped new threads into it so we can use another bolt. Now with our studs extracted, let's clean up this mating surface. I'm going to start with a razor blade only because someone has used some sort of sealant here because these studs, as you remember, were broken, and instead of repairing it the right way, they just put some sealant in there and called it a day. So I have to scrape that off before I sand this flat, otherwise the sandpaper will just get clogged up on this sealant. Obviously, if you don't have that, just go ahead and sand it flat, make sure it's nice and clean, or wire brush it, do whatever you have to do. The reason I'm using a razor blade, not a screwdriver or anything else. If you had a gasket scraper, I guess you could use that, but this is aluminum, so it'll get damaged very easily if you dig into it with a screwdriver or something very pointy and hard. So the metal that you're using cannot be harder than this. And I know the razor blade is, but because it's so thin, it actually makes it a lot weaker. You're a lot less likely to damage the surface. Now it's time to put the studs in. So first I'm going to blow out these holes, make sure there's nothing in there. And now we're just going to start the studs on by hand, make sure they all go in nicely. For me, that one, well, I had some mishaps and it's actually tapped to a different size, so I'm not going to put the stud provided in at this point. I'm just going to wait, and I'm actually going to use a bolt on this one once the manifold is on. Again, that hopefully doesn't happen to you, but this is the case for me. So now we're just gonna bottom these out, make them nice and snug. I'm just going to double check them all by hand now. Now it's time to put the gaskets on. Okay, they're not going to stay perfectly, but as long as they stay kind of in place, you should be good to go. And right before we put in the manifold, put in these studs at the bottom them out, and then we'll tighten them. On this side, you actually can put these on first. On the other side, we could not. To tighten these, you can just use a 7mm socket. Just make them snug. There we go. Just like the studs on the head, when you put the nut on, it'll tighten both ends. Now you can take the manifold and slide it in. Going to remove these two studs here because it looks like they are in my way, which I did not realize that I couldn't clear them, but I can't. These are going to have to go on after the manifold is situated in place here, and at this point I might as well take this one out too to eliminate any other obstacles. All right, let's try this again. That's better. Okay, now we can put these studs in and then the gasket. Can't tighten this one yet, just because I don't have clearance for my ratchet, so I'm going to slide the manifold on, and then with the manifold on, I'll snug this up, then we'll put the nuts on. Slide the gasket over, make sure it's centered on all the studs. Have some mounting nuts ready, because we're going to slide the manifold on, and I'm just going to start a couple of them so that it can stay in place. That one was blocking me, so I took it back out, probably because it can't go in all the way. Okay. Hold the manifold on and start on one of the mounting nuts. Doesn't matter which one, just one of them so it can stay here. And start on a second one. I guess now you can just start on all of them as long as it's staying in place. Okay, all the top ones are done. Just sneak in here and do the bottom ones. I was able to get that stud in down here. Wasn't easy. And now let's put the nut on. Now I'm just going to bottom them out in the same sequence that we did on the other side. So starting from the top at the rear, move to the bottom rear, top on the second one, bottom second, and so on. And now when it comes time to the final torque of this, just like the other side, I do not have space for a torque wrench, so I'm going to use a beefier ratchet and just make it snug. And that's tight. And the last one for me is down at the bottom in the back here, which is the one that I had to use a different size bolt for. Okay, whew, that's tight. If you remember, we have this stud right here to extract or to remove. I guess if you wanted to reuse it, you can, but I don't see the point. We have two new ones and two brand new mounting nuts. So what I'm going to do is just put a pair of locking pliers on the stud end and then use the socket on the nut side and pull it right off. If you have to put some heat into it, go for it. Hopefully we don't, but we'll see what happens. Get them on nice and tight. You can crank this down a little extra to get some more tightness, I guess, out of the locking pliers. Okay. Well, looks like I do have to put some heat into it. You can't see it very well, neither can I. All right, the nut's getting red, so there you go. That should be plenty hot. Put the socket on there. Okay, there it goes. Get this out of here. Now, with everything situated, let's lower the engine. In my case, I'm just gonna lift the vehicle with the lift and leave the pull jacks where they are. I'm gonna go very slow to make sure that everything happens as it should. You wanna pay attention, especially to the two motor mounts, make sure those seat properly. Okay, pause right here, double check everything. Yep, engine mount is seating on this side. Okay, I'm gonna go up a little bit more, and then we're gonna go reconnect the driver's side engine mount to the block. I don't wanna wait until it's fully seated. I'll show you why. Okay, that should be good right there. So here it is. The reason I don't wanna wait is because we need to be able to move this around a little bit to line up the bolt holes. And if you put the engine right on it, obviously you're not gonna be able to move it around anymore. Now let's get the 3 bolts. We'll start with the rear one because it's the most accessible and it's already lined up. Start this one in. Not gonna tighten it yet though. I still need this to move to line up the other ones. Okay, I got this lower one in on the front side. Last one, and the trickiest one is gonna be the upper one. And there you go, that's threaded in. And back to this one in the rear. All right, that's tight. And now as we lower the engine even more, you want to pay attention to the engine mount, make sure that lines up, but also make sure that these studs for the exhaust will go through on both sides. That way you can mount the exhaust. So let's just go slow, take it step by step, and lower this engine. Okay, the engine mount lines up, so I'm gonna slide the bolt through. That way this is at least set in place. Thread it on as much as you can by hand, and we'll tighten it later. At least that'll be lined up for good now. All right, here we go. That went in smoothly. The only other thing to line up is gonna be these studs. Looks like we're pretty close, but we do have to go down a little more with the engine, so let's do that. And now with a 14mm socket, let's tighten up these mounting nuts. We'll go back and forth, that way it seats evenly. And make sure these are nice and tight because there's no gasket in there. The lip, that bevel on the pipe, seals up against the manifold. I actually put a little bit of exhaust gasket maker on there to help it seal up because the old pipe is most likely not perfect anymore. But if you make these nice and tight, obviously don't over tighten them. These are breakable, obviously, if you tighten them too much, or they will strip, and then you have to replace them again. I'm gonna leave it right there. That looks good to me. It's sealed up, it's centered. Let's do the other side. That's nice and sealed up as well. It's even, it's seated, perfect. Now the passenger side engine mount had this plate on it, which most likely fell off as you were removing it. Put the two mounting nuts back on, and let's tighten these up. Then we'll move to the driver's side and tighten that one up. I wanted to do this one first, that way I know that both of them are situated perfectly as they should be. Perfect. And on the driver's side, let's tighten up this large 24mm bolt. Nice and snug. Now that all the other mounts are done, let's finish it up by putting the transmission mount nuts back on. Nice and snug. And now it's time to put the fender liners back. Just trying to line it up the best you can. It's not going to be the easiest because these are fairly stiff and molded to exactly how they want to sit. I'm going to reattach the ABS wire on the back side, and you just basically have to find the position that it wants to be in to slide behind everything. The fender, this wheel arch, line up with the strut tower in the front here. It's not difficult, it's just time consuming. Looks like it lines up pretty well. Let's secure it. Doesn't really matter where you start. I'm just going to start at the rear on this screw right here that goes through this wheel arch, as well as the fender, and then the fender liner clamps them all together. This was the 7mm screw. Next, the two 5.5mm screws. There's one here. There should be a third one right up in the middle, but mine's missing. So I'm just gonna put back the two that this truck actually had. And at the front, don't forget about this plastic bracket here. The bolt on this side stayed in the fender liner for me. And this one I'm gonna line up and start in. And now let's do the same to the other side. Now let's get the wheel back on. Start on all 6 of your lug nuts, bottom them out, and torque them in a cross pattern. It's important to do that so the wheel can seat properly to 150 foot-pounds. Here we go, 150 in a cross pattern. There you go. You can double check it if you want. If not, take it for a road test. Let's put this back on. Make sure it slides over the throttle body and bottoms out completely. While I'm at it, I'm going to start the mounting bolts in so it stops moving around. Start the driver's rear mounting bolt, but remember that this first one here has to go over that resonator, so wait and do that last. We'll bolt these down first, snug it, and then put the resonator in, and then that goes on. But while we're here, let's connect these lines. Make sure this bottoms out all the way, and then make sure this tab locks in. And there was an electrical connector retainer here. Press this down, and now let's snug those bolts up. Make sure these are nice and snug. Okay, and now we can put this resonator on. Now let's get this back on. Make sure it's fully seated on there. And before I release this clamp, I'm going to slide the bolt in. That way I know it's all lined up. Snug this up while I'm at it. Make sure that's nice and snug. And to release this clamp, what you want to do is press down on the center part. A lot of times you can just tap it and it'll release. Sometimes you have to raise this up like that. Just depends on the tool you're using and the clamp. But basically this hook stops on this side of the clamp and you have to raise this side up and lower this one. Now let's put this part of the intake back on. Get it onto the air box first. Make sure it slides on and it's completely bottomed out. As you can see, these two arrows need to line up. And over here, slide it over. Make sure this clamp is still properly secured on there. Let's tighten it up. Use your 8mm socket and just make it snug. Don't make it too tight because these clamps do strip out. And if you break it, you'll need a new one. There we go. Do the same over here. Make sure this is still seated all the way. You don't want any air leaks. And there you have it. Now let's reconnect the battery, put it on. It might make some noises and potentially a little spark. That just depends on how many things are trying to run at the same time. Use the same 8mm wrench or socket, tighten it up, just make it nice and snug. What you're going for is not to crush this completely, but just enough to not be able to move this around. That's perfect. Also make sure it's bottomed out all the way. You want it flush with the bottom, not flush with the top. Now with everything back together, turn the truck on, make sure you have no exhaust leaks. If you do, you're going to want to correct them, of course, and take it for a road test. So there you have it. I hope you found this video helpful. If you did, don't forget to leave a like. And as always, don't forget to subscribe and ring that bell so you can stay up to date with all of our latest content. Thanks for watching.